Today we're here with Alex Evangelidi, and Alex is a cutting-edge pioneer in natural childbirth. She's a midwife that has a very stellar track record of being innovative and teaching doctors and educating parents about natural birth and the benefits of that. And not only that, she has a wide background, as I've known her, in areas of like proper cuisine, like raw food cuisine, and superfoods, and proper diet, also prenatal yoga. And she's a very deeply spiritual and compassionate person, is the thing that I love her about her the most, because I think that makes a big difference in the birth outcomes. And Alex is well known in the LA community for being somebody that parents can rely upon when they have an issue or concerned. And she's got a 15-year track record of being at the forefront of in this area of natural childbirth. Now, Alex, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is we hear a lot about parents being concerned about their birth outcomes. And rarely do they talk about the father. Sometimes it's just focused on the mother, mm-hmm. either blaming or whatever, like whatever the birth outcome is. Now, rarely are fathers included in this. I mean, if you even talk to fathers, they think, I don't, what is my role in this? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, a lot of moms come to me and they're frustrated. It's like, how do I talk to my husband or my partner or my boyfriend to convince him that he really needs to do the right method, to really get ready before conception, and so forth. Now you're on the other end of the spectrum, mm-hmm. where you're giving birth and you're seeing the results of the preparation, all this hard work to get your body prepared. How would you talk to these moms? What would you say to them? What should I say to my husband about this?
Well, the first thing I want to say is, we always approach our clients with the perspective that your partner is not an accessory. They are an inclusive part of this whole experience really working out well. Certainly we invite them to each prenatal appointment, and we don't just focus our attention on the mom, we also include the dad. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the dads need the appointments more than the moms do, mm-hmm. because for women there's often an innate trust about what's happening in their bodies. For men, it's mm-hmm. This mystery about what has transformed inside of the woman, and what's they almost look at it like this alien experience, mm-hmm. While also being faced with our own history, our own traumas, and being parented, and our own lack of real understanding, mm-hmm. but knowing that our world is about to get transformed and turned inside out and upside down.
Now, when I talk to men about this, and dads, what they communicate to me, and it's like I want to be a part of it, but to me it's kind of really scary, because I don't know what to do. I don't give birth to babies. I don't know how to breastfeed. I don't know what to do. And then and they say at the same time, it seems like it's the mom's role, and I just want to let it be. I mean, mm-hmm. what would you say to them?
Well, the first piece of advice is have them take an extensive childbirth class with their partner. Typically the ones that are offered by the hospital are not really extensive. Mm-hmm. Like, you'll see people snoring in the classroom. I've attended these hospital-based childbirth classes, and it's painful. They're really teaching parents how to be good patients instead of feeling really empowered in their choices. Mm-hmm. Read books, what to expect when you're expecting, not to bash it, but it's not really an empowering journal of what's possible in pregnancy. So there are tremendous resources available. Ricki Lake's movie, The Business of Being Born, that was great. She came out with 4 follow-up videos that also really point to a perspective of what's possible when we live inside of the birth experience being potentially incredibly transformational, profound, the zenith human experience that we're here to have on the planet. Then we see that there's more role for the father. Midwifery care in general is much more inclusive. I work with an obstetrician, Dr. Stuart Fishbein. He spent 25 years working in the hospital, and he said that when he'd get to the hospital, everyone would look to him to do something. So, in a hospital setting, typically everybody's paying attention to the monitors, to the machines going beep, to the nurses, and everything other than the connection between the husband and wife, or the two partners, whether it's single sex. There's all sorts of varieties of how this can go. So the setting the attention not towards to the machines, the doctors and the nurses, but to the laboring couple, to each other.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because there's this trend towards, in the last, say, 40, 50 years, toward the mechanization, the the technology of childbirth, and we seems like we become more and more compartmentalized and distanced from the actual bonding moment and experiential and spiritual, emotional intelligence. You say that is part of which I think it's kind of like a spiritual practice even. I mean, if you look at the most amazing experience in our lives, it's that moment when we come into this world from the spiritual planes, and we come incarnate into this physical body, and yet we take that moment of conception so casually, almost cavalier away, and same with birth. We think like, just go to the hospital, you do this, and cesarean's normal, like Ricky Lake points out, But in your experience, I mean, what is your experience in being there and seeing these amazing, events take place? I mean, what is it to you, this experience?
You're asking me to encapsulate something in language that is the holograph of human experience.
Well, you're telling me a lot with your eyes right now.
One thing that I will say is that when a woman is empowered going into this experience, and her partner is empowered,
right,
meaning feeling like there's a modicum of choice. Control is a funny word, and I try not to use that very much, because there's so many details we cannot control. But we can choose who's present in the room and the space. Given that we are low risk, we can choose where we're giving birth. And given that, we have been given the options to do so. Sometimes women who are attempting a VBAC have fewer options, and that's another conversation we can get into at another point in time. But when the partners feel engaged with each other and supported by their care providers, supported by their birth team, they will go into this experience with trust and surrender and a willingness to be a participant in the nuances of the journey.
Got it.
And as a care provider, when I step into the birth container inside of those elements being present, it is sometimes so subtle and profound to watch that I actually feel like I want to hold my energy back so much that I don't interrupt the dance or the orchestral experience of what's happening between the couple. It is absolutely wonderful to be able to participate in birth in this way, and to have my clients' trust, and to feel that we are in this together, that we are all able to communicate and dialogue what's needed, that there's an experience of transparency and authenticity, but also and I don't mean to get too woo here, but there's a frequency that happens that I feel like I'm going to just step out. I'm not going to be present. I'm going to come in, assess, get the information I need to ascertain that it's safe to continue, and then I'm going to step back out, because what's happening in the exchange in the couple is so beautiful. The partner really becomes the care provider.
Got it.
Not necessarily the expert, but what is created in that kind of experience is a foundation of trust between them. As a couple gets into this deeper level of commitment together, because they're birthing a child, they're building a new foundation for their relationship and their family. And I like to see that being carried through. I love it when the partner catches the baby. I had this incredible birth experience a few years ago, where we were at our house in the mountains. It was a water birth, everybody, it was hush. You couldn't hear any of the older children. You couldn't hear the midwives. We wanted to hide under the table because what was happening was so beautiful. And at one point, the mom in her state says, he's coming now. I have to push. Nobody's saying anything. There's no interruption of what's happening in her own neurological circuitry, except for the stimulation, the hormones, the sensations that's already occurring. As the baby was coming out, we saw the head. I think we checked to see if there was a cord, and then everything was fine. We stepped back out, and then the baby was doing its full rotation. At one point, her son was halfway out, looking around under the water. The mother's eyes are closed. The father and the son are making eye contact. They look at each other under the water. The father's hands are there protecting the baby's transition from outside of the mother into the earth, but through the water. They're having their own exchange. Everybody in the room is like, is this happening? At one point, the baby starts doing this under the water. And like clearly was crying, okay, it's time. He helps deliver his son. Holds the baby outside of the water until the mother has a moment to collect herself and then witnesses this. So beautiful, so profound, and difficult to have this kind of experience in a hospital setting. And yet what I see inside of these kinds of moments is a level of intactness between everybody present, you know, that this is quite possible. You know, and it's such a victory. Such a completion in what started this experience between the husband and the wife, or the two partners having an act of lovemaking for conception.
Well, that's really a beautiful description of what you're describing, your personal experience, I'm sure. And now that the word empowered is a very broad word to people. It means a lot of different things. Some women would say, you know, I feel empowered because I can do IVF and I can take birth control pills. I have choice in the matter. And then I can go and I can get a cesarean section and I can get my child vaccinated. I feel empowered by that. That's what empowered means to them. And then to other women, empowered means, you know, I've prepared, I've done everything. I'm taking personal responsibility. I'm not a victim of circumstance. And so there's this wide gap in the middle where there's this mental effluvia and fog of disinformation out there about, you know, the educated people out there. It seems like the more educated scientists and medical researchers are these days, the more disinformed they are, and the more they're spreading a kind of a propaganda of what to expect to the birth outcomes, which we do not see happen. We see the opposite occurring, of course. So there's this huge mental disconnect in our society. And how do we resolve this? Because people, they want to believe in their practitioners. They want to believe the government. They want to believe big corporations. But, you know, under their watch, under the watch and power of CDC, NIH, government powers that are threatening doctors to pull away their licenses unless they follow their training and protocols very strictly, which require them to do these things. What are we supposed to do as a people to communicate to them? Hey, what's the gem of wisdom that we need to go back to this maternal lineage that our great ancestors, our great grandmothers and grandfathers taught us? How do we communicate that?
Well, in the same way that everybody finds their own path to empowerment, I believe those paths have to be respected. And, you know, I don't believe there is necessarily a wrong way to go about it. I think you want more than anything for people to walk away from the experience with that sense of empowerment. It's not our job necessarily to say, no, here's the right way, because that's puts us in the same position as the obstetricians or the corporations or the government, you know, the special interests. We can't do that. I do believe it's an intrinsic path of self-discovery, and that we have to go through our own initiations, you know, of like, we make big decisions in our life. We must be responsible for those decisions that we make. We can't put our trust necessarily in other people. We have to be the ones who are forming our own dictates. We have to really discover what feels right for me, weighing all the options. We have to do our own research. We cannot necessarily trust the internet. You can't trust us. You know, you really have to dig deep for your own sense of you're your own barometer, you're your own frequency monitor of, okay, this feels good to me, that feels good to me. That's why there are so many options here. You know, it's about exploring what's best for you given each circumstance.
Well, where do people go? Do they go inside? Is it inside us? Is it a direction? Where do they find this truth at? Because I've seen people that meditate. They're very spiritual. They're very ethical. They're very moral. They want a great society. They're very ecologically minded. They're very considerate of others. But then they go and they eat perfectly. But then, boom, they have autism. So they think, where do I go? I did go inside. I consulted with God. And I now, why did this happen to me? So what do you say to them? They felt like they did get empowered. They empowered themselves. But actually what they tell me is that, why didn't you say more to me? That's usually they say, like, why didn't you direct me more? Why didn't you guide me more? Because I didn't know that I was sitting on all these blind spots. What do you say to those people who are shocked by their birth outcomes?
Well, I really believe that this is an incredible initiation. Being a parent is tremendous. You're being initiated into parenthood, but you're walking through the biggest transformational experience of your life. There's a saying, you've heard it before, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So many of us are not ready to get this information at that time.
Right.
For many of us, weighing the options, it feels safer. I look at my insurance card. I go to the doctor that's in my insurance plan. It's cheaper. I don't have to do any guesswork. My life is busy. This is convenient. They go through this experience. They have this relationship. They have this experience. It is only through trial and effort, trial and error, that we really we come to realizations. We are constantly in a state of waking up. So you're only waking up through often very difficult challenges placed in front of you. But that's where the empowerment piece shows up, right? It's through the fact that their child had an injury related to a vaccination, or through the experience of giving birth in an environment or with care providers that didn't necessarily have their best interests, that they are like, wow, that happened. But if it wasn't for that experience itself, they wouldn't have necessarily done the internal work necessary to bring them to the other side, where they're like, okay, that happened. I've made peace with it.
Got it.
Where can I become proactive about all of these subjects in the future?
Got it. Welcome back, everyone. We're here with Alex Evangelidi again. And Alex, I'm so glad you brought up this subject of choice and who we are, and in the midst of having babies and conceiving babies, because so often we just see the routine of it, and we get into the mechanized technology of it, and it seems so distant from human experience itself. And some of the great philosophers have considered these deeper considerations with the philosophical, spiritual, and linguistic consideration around, do we have choice? I mean, do we have choice if we are ignorant of distinctions, if we don't have distinctions? In other words, say a person has never been exposed to this kind of information, do they really even have a choice to even go to be empowered? Because if they don't have the choice, then where is the distinction called empowerment? Like, in other words, where are they empowered with self-responsibility, which is where real power comes from, responsibility, right? So how do people actually empower themselves in existence conversation, where they're actually in real life powerful, making choices that are informed, for instance?
These are big questions, some very heavy questions you're throwing at me. Here's what I can tell you. We have all been faced with birth. Although we don't necessarily swim in the waters of birth in preconception, every day we have all been born. And to step into what we intrinsically know is a monumental event in our lives, with ignorance, we will become a victim to circumstance. If we do the work to educate ourselves like we would if we were going to college, we would research colleges. We would watch documentaries about birth. We would read books. There are so many accessible resources now to help people along the path of their own exploration. We're going to get there. People are going to tap into this information. Should we choose not to? Should we choose to just go through the motions? We will be victim of what could have been monumental, and it will become swept under the rug like every generation. So I really encourage people to just start somewhere in the exploration phase of this experience and to sit with yourself and say, what are you seeking from this experience? Are you seeking to have choice? Are you seeking to be involved in the decision-making process about what tests are available, about what kind of care options you have, who you want present, knowing that we always are choosing. You know, choosing not to choose is a fine choice for people who don't have time and don't care.
Right. Now, well, I mean, in my family, for instance, I've seen so many of my relatives not only not look at the choice, not even look at the distinction, but they're just continuing on as if it's business as usual, even though my family's been just hit by, birth after birth, a disastrous birth, really, quite disastrous. And yet I've written this book, I have this knowledge, I have all these friends and colleagues who they could consult with that free of charge I would offer my services, I still do. And, the average person who comes to you and to me and other practitioners, they don't know that these things even exist. I mean, and therefore, do they even have a choice? In other words, they read the news and they look at television, they see that, they go talk to their doctor. That's their world. They don't consider any of these questions that we consider common knowledge in our community. How do we reach out to them? Because a lot of them are very poor. They don't have the resources. They have to work all day. Both parents have to work. They say, I didn't know that how could this happen to me? But they've just trusted the system. How do we reach those people?
I think it's an excuse, honestly, to say I work all day, I don't have access. The resources are available on Netflix. I mean, it's not really rocket science. I'm not willing to be responsible for people who are not interested in educating themselves.
So you said responsible. That's a very powerful word. So, would you agree that for people to have power, they have to be responsible first, or does responsibility come after you're empowered?
Here's what I'll answer.
Should we wait for empowerment to come?
It's much easier for me to answer this question this way. If you want the information, it's out there, like everything. People will either choose the status quo or they will question everything.
But I talk to them, they say, I don't even know where to look.
The internet, Google, there are so many.
They go on the internet, but they don't even know what to search for. They go birth,
Great. That's a great place to start.
Is it?
Yeah.
Because they get the same kind of information, they say. They don't see you or I up there. They don't see it.
Not yet.
Natural.
No, I think you go to the bookstore and you look at, look, we all have a framework within which we operate inside of our lives.
Right.
For some people, they are devoutly religious, and that is the dictate through which they manage to move throughout the world. And inside of that spectrum, they will find access to care providers who can respect their religion, respect their philosophical or personal choices. Okay, that is there is a lens through which we experience the world, and all you or I can do is produce the information, make it accessible, but we can't. I don't think we should try and shove it down people's throat. I think people who are seeking information will find you. They will find your books. They will find your website. They will find your address. If they look online and do people search, they will find you.
Right.
But it's about as a care provider, you have to look at yourself as, okay, I am the wave. Right? Like, I have this sea of information and I'm lapping upon the shores and putting it out there to the public. And those who are thirsty or who are ready for a ride on the wave will come. They will take their boat and they will jump in.
Well, I can say I had that perspective for a long time. I thought, well, here I am. If it's right, if it's meant to be, they'll find me. But I find their perspective from patients is like, oh no, I would have done something if I knew about this. And they say, you got to get it out there, because people need to know about this. And I'm like, well, I'm trying. I'm doing my best. Like, we're both trying our best, right? And again, they don't see you or me out there. So I don't know, I don't think there is any real answer to this, right? But this is the kind of questions they're asking. They're saying, like, how come this happened to me? There's a bottom line is like, why did this happen to me? And that's what they always say when they have a child with some kind of a birth challenge or condition or autism spectrum disorder. They don't get, because they thought they were doing everything right, you see, and they thought they did their research already. They thought that they had a handle. And this is what I hear all day, every day, is like, wow, how did I get slammed? Because I thought I was doing everything perfectly.
Well, we all wake up at the perfect time. Right? And we can look at these things that have happened to our children, or based on the choices that we've made. This is what the result of those choices are. But don't underestimate the power of those moments to be the fulcrum of which they do wake up. Remember, I think it's really like, I had a teacher once tell me that without the challenges themselves, we would never get the strength of overcoming. So, very specific to this, it's the trials. It is the having to now navigate through a challenge where we strengthen our resolve and make future decisions. We live in an information age, and the mere speed at which information and research is becoming so much more accessible than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, pre-internet. You would have to go research information in a card catalog to find a book that was at a library in 200 miles away to get the information that now you can get on your iPhone, or whatever form of communication device you access. So I don't worry about that. I think that what's important is that we acknowledge the people once they come to this place and say, okay, I'm ready. And we're like, great, here it is.
Well, that's, I couldn't agree more. Well, because it is a frustration for parents, and we see that so many parents are experiencing this. I don't see it as anyone's fault, and I don't think you do either. But sometimes they often blame themselves. And what I ask them, what's bothering them, they say, I'm just so overwhelmed. I go on the internet, I'm just overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed with information. I can't read anymore. I'm just like exhausted of reading, and I just want somebody to, give me direction or summarize this for me to know where I should go. I don't know who to believe. I don't know where to go.
Can I give you a context?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about politics for a moment, which I know is a very heated subject for most people. You may find that you feel like you resonate with a particular political party more than any other. However, there are aspects inside of that party that you really don't agree with. You actually agree with a different political party. So here's the same thing with experts, right? You are an expert in your field. I'm an expert in my field. But I have clients who will absolutely respond to something I say and disagree completely. I might be a non-vaccinating mother. And when I'm counseling my clients, I have to give a different perspective. I have to kind of show all options, right? I cannot tell my clients what to do, because now I'm taking away something from them that could have been empowering, or could have, maybe if a client hears from me that I don't vaccinate, then they don't vaccinate, and then their kid comes down with something, and then they're like, wait a second, we individually have to decide from each option that's available to us, what makes the most sense? You know, I'm not here to tell my clients what to do. Then I'm taking away choice from them. I want them to do the research. And it's that big a deal. It's that big a deal that step away from the computer, come back to it. But we shouldn't put all of our stock into one doctor or one body of research, because then you're missing sometimes other nuances that evidence-based medicine can't encapsulate.
Well, thank you. This is very provocative discussion. It's just exactly what parents need to hear right now, because this conversation is what's coming up for almost everyone I talk to today. So I really appreciate you being just authentic about this situation. They want to hear from people like yourself about this, that see the birth outcomes every day. And it is a huge dilemma for people, what they do, how they're responsible in life, and so forth. And when you look at the amount of, like you're saying, there's expertise out there, and they look at the specialization, and they think, oh my God, this person's highly educated, I trust them. And many people look at his birth as a sacred event. And very few people talk about who we're being. Like if you go to an OBGYN doctor, like who we being spiritually. Do you think that consciousness is at the root of choice? Like that where do we contact it? Where do we tell people to go, give them a direction to go in, so they can tap into this well of wisdom and experience that does exist today in the perinatal community worldwide? As you know, we know these scientists, we know these professors, we know real experts that have spent their entire lives studying this perinatal period and how the baby forms optimally in the womb. But they seem to not to know where to go or how to approach this kind of area of life, or these experts. What can we say to those parents? Like, look, I don't know about that. I never heard about those things.
That's really a big question. I would say start somewhere. Start very simply, and go to the bookstores and start digesting little bits.
Well, some people are saying, a safe gateway for a lot of people where they feel comfortable and secure in is food, And so we're kind of like, some people are saying, start people off with saying, hey, let's start off with how you eat, and people are very comfortable with that because you're not making anyone wrong, and we don't want to make other practitioners wrong. It's not about that. It's about just making certain things very clear, like what works and what doesn't work, right? And of course, you and I are in this conversation all the time. We're thinking about this. We're doing this every day. But most people are abstract. This is an abstract reality for them. It doesn't have like on the ground, hands-on reality for them. They don't get how there could be such a disconnect between politicians, media, specialists in hospitals and so forth, and pharmaceutical companies and the mainstream, prevailing narrative that's going on. And so I really appreciate you talking about this, because this is the ultimate dilemma we're dealing with today, and really appreciate you going into that.